Right. Hello, everybody. If you're watching this, then you have likely completed the philosophy of religion portion of the class. And today marks the first day of the intro to ethics portion of the course. So we're going to be surveying some moral theories, right, which fall under normative ethics. And then we're also going to be looking at some applied ethics issues as well. So, this is to just kind of today is just to give us a sense of what it is that we're going to be doing in this section, getting some terminology under our belt, and as well as entertaining some cases that will be kind of fun. So the first thing is consider this case. What is the right thing to do in this case? So let's say that you're walking, this is you right here, and you're walking along a railroad track and you see a trolley coming. But you look over to your left and you see all of these people, 5 people tied up to the tracks, such that the trolley is going to run over these people if you do nothing. However, you see that there's one person on a side way of the track, such that if you were to flip this switch, you would divert the trolley from its path, running over this person. So you can save 5 people by killing one person, or what you can do is you can do nothing and let 5 people die and not kill the one person. Okay, so ethically speaking, what should you do in this circumstance? So it seems like it seems like this is a moral issue. We're talking about life and death. There's a life and death situation here. So potentially you could do something that's morally wrong, or you could do something that's potentially like morally right. This isn't just a neutral scenario. So do you save the one person uh, and let 5 people die, or do you save 5 people and let one person die? If you're thinking that that you kill the one person to save 5 people, consider a slight alteration on the case. Okay, let's say you're standing on this bridge, see, and you see that there's a trolley coming, and it's going to run over these 5 people. Okay, but instead of flipping a switch, what you're going to do to stop the trolley is you're going to push this very large man off of the bridge and in front of the trolley, such that his body is going to stop the trolley and save these 5 people. Right. So what you're doing is you're going to just shove. Maybe it's not even a very hard shove. You're just going to kind of push lightly, and he's going to fall, and it's going to stop the trolley, but he's also probably going to die. So, what do you do in this scenario? So, if you thought that you should flip the switch and kill one person, do you still think that you ought to push this guy off the bridge? Are these in some way different? Okay, and then let's think of another case. Let's suppose that you're a brilliant surgeon, and right now you have 5 terminally ill patients. They all need organ transplants. However, what's happened is that you don't have the organs to save these 5 people, right? Okay, enter Chuck. Chuck is one of your patients. He's just coming in for kind of a routine checkup, right? And you're talking to Chuck, and you begin to realize Chuck is a healthy person. He has no family, no friends, nobody would miss him. And you realize that his blood type would also fit all of these people that need organs. So the question is, do you potentially let your 5 patients die, or do you kill Chuck and chop up Chuck? And then give his organs to these 5 people. What do you think? What's the right thing to do in these circumstances, right? So essentially, we're asking the same question: do we save the 5 people at the expense of one person, or do we um, refrain from saving the 5 people and let them die and not kill the one person. Same question, different scenarios. Potentially, they'll give us different moral intuitions. Moral intuition is kind of our knee-jerk reaction when we hear one of these cases. If we feel like something's wrong, we have an intuition that something is wrong. So how do we make sense of these cases? Um, these cases seem really difficult, and maybe there's no answer, but it seems like it seems like we should figure out something or some reasons that we can give to think about what we ought to do in these various cases. And so ethics attempts to give various answers to what we ought to do in various cases, including the trolley problem and the chop up Chuck case. So ethics is the reason giving normative activity of figuring out what our moral obligations are. Christine Korsgaard famously says that ethics is by definition like fundamentally a reason giving activity, right? So somebody says, well, why did you do that? Well, I did that because it would have been wrong not to do it. Oh, okay, so why would have been wrong? And you say, well, it would be wrong not to feed my children because parents have an obligation to their children, things like this, right? So we ask questions and we're giving reasons for why things are morally right or morally wrong. um, and we also, what we do is when we're thinking through a particular case, we identify various features about the case, and we take those into consideration and try to come up with a moral judgment as a consequence. Okay, so we might wonder, okay, what are the features that make actions or dispositions or whatever morally right or morally wrong, right? So we can say that an action or actions are morally right or morally wrong because of blank, right? What are the features that make an action morally right or morally wrong? Okay, so ethical theories are going to give answers to this question, right? They're gonna, so to speak, fill in the blank. Um, so we might say that an action is right or wrong because of its consequences, right? So we can imagine that look, it's bad to let five people die. So and killing one person is not as bad as five people dying. So the best outcome is to kill the one person. So what we do is we flip the trolley switch and we kill the one person, we save five. And it seems like five is better than one. And so we could identify the consequences of various actions as reasons why things are right and wrong. And we could suck out everything else and just look at the outcomes, just look at the consequences. And we're going to be that's a view called consequentialism, which we will discuss very soon. We might also say that an action is right or wrong given the very nature of the action itself, or whether or not it maintains or violates various rules. Right. So, according to deontology, actions have to be consistent with the rules of rational agency, such that we always appreciate the rational agency in other people, the personhood in other people. So things like lying is always going to be wrong regardless of the outcomes, right? We might also think that an action is right or wrong because of God's command. According to divine command theory or perfect being ethics, we always have to act in ways such that a perfect being would have us act. So actions are right or wrong insofar as they violate the mandates of a perfect being like God. Perhaps an action is right or wrong because it reflects bad character, or a virtuous person wouldn't or would do that thing. So, for example, in virtue ethics, we're gonna think about what is it about the good person or a perfectly good person? Like, what would that person do in these various circumstances? What are the kinds of traits that that person has? we therefore ought to have those traits, and we also ought to do the things that that person is doing as well. Or um, maybe it's some combination of these considerations, right? So different moral theories, which we're going to be talking about very soon, are going to give different proposed features of what makes certain actions wrong and what makes certain actions right. Okay, so let's shift a little bit to some terminology. Um, so we can say that an action is morally right, um, but that could mean two different things. So we talk a lot about ethical obligations in philosophy. So your obligations, this means that you are obliged to do them. That is, uh, if you fail to do those actions, then that results in a moral wrongdoing, either to a person or a wronging kind of in general, right? So if I'm obligated, say, to give somebody money and I do something else instead of doing that, I've done something morally wrong, right? So suppose I'm walking by a pond and I see a little kid drowning. I could just like reach my hand in there and save them, right? Suppose I'm morally obligated to do that. To walk away would be to do something morally wrong, would be to fail to meet up my obligations. And so, in this way, we are. This is an inescapable part of morality. If you are morally obligated to do something, then you must do that something else. You're doing something wrong in virtue of, say, um, not doing that thing that you're obligated to do. Now, morally right action could also mean a permissible action. These are what we might call moral options, right? So if something is morally permissible to do, that means that you can do it, but you're not doing anything wrong in virtue of not doing it, right? So you can do the thing, or you can choose to not do the thing, right? So the famous example is you open up your refrigerator and you've got two Cokes left, right? A Coke on the left and a Coke on the right. Assuming that it's morally okay to drink a Coca-Cola, um, you have the it's morally permissible to take either the one on the left or the one on the right, right? And so many of the things that we do, potentially it's morally permissible to do those things. um, so one of the interesting things about consequentialism that we will discuss at least a little bit is that according to consequentialism, there are no morally permissible actions. There are only obligations, right? So according to consequentialism, we always have to do the thing that brings about the very best outcome. Every action that we undertake has to be the very best outcome every single time. And so if we ever do something that's not the best thing to do, that thing is wrong. So you only have moral obligations and moral wrongdoings or moral wrong actions and impermissible actions. And that's like a feature of this view. Um, so you don't have any moral options according to consequentialism. Okay, so we also talk about things being morally wrong, right? So um, you have a friend, your friend says makes a confession to you about something that they thought was wrong, and you say, yeah, you did act wrongly, right? You acted in a way that was bad. And so what a morally wrong action is a morally impermissible action, right? This is an action that you are not permitted to do. So we might say that all obligations are morally right, all permissible actions are morally right, and all impermissible actions are morally wrong. And so doing this action results in a moral wrongdoing that supposedly you want to avoid. Okay, ethics is also like sort of composed of three areas of inquiry. The first area is meta ethics, and we're not really going to talk about this, But this deals with the metaphysical and epistemological questions behind ethics. So, for example, here are two kinds of questions. The first one is an epistemic one. How do we know what the morally right thing to do is, right? For example, consequentialism is my kind of touchstone moral theory. Consequentialism demands that we look at outcomes, right? We always have to bring about good outcomes. But doesn't that require us like knowing the future? That seems weird, right? So I'm not always going to be able to say predict what the outcome of my actions are. Suppose I'm walking by a pond and I save the little kid, and the little kid grows up to be Hitler, right? And brings about really bad outcomes. So the better outcome is to just let that kid die rather than um, rather than saving him, because it brings about more bad outcomes if we have Hitler, right? So it seems like consequentialism demand puts an epistemic demand on us insofar as we have to know what the outcomes are of our actions. Um, and so this would be a meta-ethical consideration, namely because it deals with the epistemology of ethics, right? How do we know moral rightness and moral wrongness? How do we know about good outcomes? How do we know what the right virtues are? The other question, though, is a metaphysical one. So remember, we talked about an action is morally right or wrong because of X, right? Um, so the way that the relation between moral rightness and wrongness and the feature that makes them wrong is like, what do we mean by because of, right? So how is it that we connect the feature of the action to the rightness or wrongness of the action? So there's a relation between these two things, rightness and features, and wrongness and features as well. And how we understand that connection or the metaphysical relation between those two things is an area of inquiry and also an area of metaethics that we will not talk about. It's called grounding, though. It's super fun. It's the relation between facts that stand in an explanatory relation with one another. It's very, very fun. But we're not going to go there. Another question that the metaethics deals with is the normative question, right? So we might wonder, okay, so ethics is normative, right? When we say that ethics is normative, what we mean is that it doesn't just give descriptions of the world, it gives prescriptions, right? So you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you a prescription. That is something that you ought to take, right? Insofar as you want to be healthy, you ought to do the thing that the doctor is telling you. Okay, so ethics is similar to the doctor visit, right? Ethics gives us demands, right? Tells us how we ought to do things, not and doesn't merely describe how we do things. So we might say, okay, what the normative question is what justifies the claim that morality is making on us, right? If consequentialism says that I have to give away all of my money in order to end part of world hunger, well, what justifies that claim, right? What makes it the case that I have to do that thing? What makes it normative? Again, a question that's interesting, but we won't really touch on in this class. Okay, so we turn to the second area of ethics, normative ethics, right? This is the area of various moral theories. So for the next few days, we're going to be discussing some different moral theories. We're going to look at consequentialism, moral relativism, deontology, and virtue ethics, right? Kind of the bad guy, which is moral relativism, and then the big three. And we're going to explain these moral theories, and we're going to understand how those moral theories kind of give us a very comprehensive account of what we ought to do, right? So when it comes to moral theories, we want it to explain everything, right? What makes any action morally right or morally wrong? And these three moral theories supposedly do that. We'll think more about whether or not they do it, but they supposedly they say that they do. And then the different theories, as we've already discussed, we'll talk about, or we'll identify different wrong-making features or different right-making features as well. And then also in this portion of the course, we're going to be doing some applied or practical ethics. Um, this is just like thinking about the moral theories and thinking through concrete instances or various cases in which we have to make a moral decision, right? So the question is it morally okay for somebody to have an abortion? Is it morally okay, say, for a priest or a psychiatrist to share the things about a confession or the things said in therapy with a legal authority when there's been, say, a murder, right? Can those people in their professional capacities testify in court, right? So we have to do something about like consent and like the way agreements work and the way like various moral codes work, right? So like the way like professional codes of conduct work. These are all interesting questions that would fall under like business ethics. And then we might also wonder, like, is it morally wrong for me to say, eat meat? Or is it morally wrong for me to, say, destroy a forest in order to build a shopping mall? Am I doing something wrong in virtue of doing those things? Those kinds of questions will fall under applied ethics. And then applied ethics will also use moral theories in order to make sense of um, various applied issues, right? So in this scenario, a consequentialist is going to say that blah is morally wrong because it brings about some bad outcome, right? So that is all that I have for you today. I hope I think the class for a little bit is going to get easier. So so this is good. You have completed, in virtue of completing the philosophy of religion section, you've completed the hardest part of the class. So go you.